So how do we think about processing data in an array? One thing just to realize is that you can't directly do actions with all elements of an array. What you need to do instead is to start to work out what you want to do for one element of the array, and then repeat that for each element in the array itself. For example, if we wanted to draw all of the sprites in a game, well, I need to think about how to do that for one sprite. So we would define, to draw one sprite, I call draw sprite, and I pass in that sprite. I can then repeat that instruction for each sprite, starting at index 0, going to the last index, and inside the loop here, I access that index from the array itself. And so the index, you can think about the index moving across the elements of the array one at a time, and each time performing these instructions on that particular element. I becomes the index of the current element. What about something like adding all of the values together to create a sum? How do I sum all of the values of an array? Well, to add the values together, we're going to need to keep something like a running total. It's the same idea. What is the action I need to perform for each element? And then let's do that for each element. So instructions for one element, repeated for each element. If I had a huge list of numbers I had to add together, then what I would do is keep a running sum and check each number. Grab the number, add it to the current sum, write the new sum down. Read the next value, add it to the sum, write the new value down. And that's what we're doing here. So we can see at the start, we create a sum which is initialized to the value 0. We can then perform the instruction that we want to do for each element of the array. The instruction in this case is to read the value of the element and add it to the current sum, creating a new sum, or a new running total, which we store in the sum variable. So by the end of this code, we would have calculated the total, or the sum, of all of the values in this data array, assuming that we know the size of that array. The great thing is, once you've created these functions or procedures, then you have got something that you can use to perform an action for all elements. So if draw sprite draws one sprite, then draw sprites could be passed an array of sprites and the number of sprites in that array. This is one of the challenges with standard C and C++ is that the array itself doesn't remember its size. So you've always got to pass around the array and its size. We'll look at how to avoid this in a little bit, but for the moment you'll have to pass the array and its size. Similarly, we could create a function to sum all of the doubles in an array. That function would be, as we've seen before, we would pass in the array and the size. Let's have a go now, returning back to 6.1, and I'll show you how to create a total length function. So we're going to create a function that returns the total length of all of the names in our array. You can then have a go at printing the summary to print out each of the names along with the total length of all of the names. With each name, print out the length of that name. Okay, here's the code we had before. Let's now define our own total length function. Now it's going to take in an array of strings. We'll call them names. That's an array. And it's going to take in the size, so the number of elements in that array. So adding the square brackets to the end of the name here indicates that this is going to be an array, whereas this is then the size of that array. Now internally, I need to work out how to access the length of each name. So let's, for the moment, I'll grab one name out of the list. So I'll start with the first one. We can then adjust it as we go. So once I have a name, to get its length, what I can do is using the name, this has a property attached to it called length. Now this is what's called a method. So we can execute that on this variable to access the length of that string. So this tells us how many characters are in that string. It's similar to a functional procedure, except it knows the context of what it's executing on, the same as when we access the fields of a struct. To sum these up, I'm then going to need, I'll call it the result variable, which will be the total length. At the start, that would be 0. And in here, I would say that result is equal to result plus the length of the name. Now I can simplify that using plus equals. That's the instructions I need to perform on each element, or for each element. So here I can now say for, and in the code here, you can actually just declare the index variable here for int I, so it's going to create an index variable equals 0, while I is less than my size parameter. I increment I at the end of the loop. And these become the instructions inside that loop that need to be performed on each element. The only thing I need to make sure is that when I access an element in the array, I use the index I to refer to that element. In this case, because I represents the index that I want to process. At the end, I can return the result. It will have the total length of all of the names, because I have this running total that I'm calculating here. Once I've gone through all of them, that will be the total length of all of the names. Let's calculate and write that out at the end here. So I could have a total variable. I could say total is equal to the total length of all of the names. And I have to pass in the constant to indicate, how many names are in that actual array. Let's write that out. We can do that with total length. There we go, and then call write line and pass in total. If we compile and run that now. All right, so let's just give, that's 4. So the total length of all of those characters is 20. 4 plus 6 is 10, 14, 18, 20. And so we can see that it has calculated that total correctly. If we run it again, and we give different names, we can see that it calculates the length correctly there. Each name in this case is 1 character long. Go ahead and try creating your own print summary procedure. You can use the total length in order to print out the total length of all of the names.